They mocked that I was infertile at Dad's funeral when I got his letter. I knew exactly what to do. I'm 36 years old, and until 3 months ago, I genuinely believed my family thought I was a complete disappointment. My name is Millie Clark. I'm an artist who specializes in abstract watercolors that most people don't understand, and I've spent the better part of my adult life being the black sheep of the Clark family dynasty. What I didn't know was that everything was about to change at my father's funeral in the most dramatic, satisfying, and utterly ridiculous way possible. But let me start from the beginning, because this story gets really good. And I want you to appreciate just how spectacularly my relatives managed to dig their own graves. The morning of Dad's funeral, I stood in front of my closet for 20 minutes, trying to decide between my one black dress, which made me look like a gothic scarecrow, or my navy blue vintage suit, which Aunt Margaret had once described as what homeless people wear to job interviews. I went with the suit, because if I was going to disappoint my family, I might as well do it with style. St. Matthew's Episcopal Church was packed with what felt like half of Denver's social elite. The Clarks weren't just wealthy, we were old money wealthy. The kind of family that had buildings named after us and got invited to charity galas where a single plate cost more than most people's rent. I, however, was the family artist, which in Clark family terms translated roughly to the embarrassing relative we don't talk about at dinner parties. I slipped into a pew near the back, hoping to avoid the inevitable parade of condolences that would invariably include comments about my lifestyle choices. My cousin Bradley spotted me immediately and waved me forward with the enthusiasm of someone flagging down a taxi in the rain. "Millie, come sit with the family," he called out, loudly enough that half the congregation turned to stare. I shuffled forward, past rows of perfectly coiffed relatives who looked like they'd stepped out of a country club catalog. There was Uncle Richard in his $1,000 suit, Aunt Patricia with her weekly Botox appointments, and my sister Jennifer, who'd married a plastic surgeon and looked like she'd personally sampled his entire menu. The service was beautiful. I'll give them that. Pastor Williams spoke eloquently about Dad's contributions to the community, his business acumen, and his dedication to family. What he didn't mention was Dad's legendary inability to express emotion, his tendency to communicate primarily through disapproving silence, or the fact that he'd spent most of my childhood looking at my artwork like I'd just presented him with roadkill. I'd learned to paint partly as a way to process my feelings about being the family disappointment. While my siblings excelled in business school and married appropriately wealthy spouses, I'd spent my 20s in a drafty studio apartment, surviving on ramen noodles and the occasional art sale. Dad had never said he was proud of my work, never displayed any of my paintings in the family home, and never missed an opportunity to suggest that maybe I should consider something more practical. After the service, we gathered at the family estate for the traditional post-funeral reception. The Clark mansion was exactly what you'd expect: massive, intimidating, and decorated with the kind of antiques that made you afraid to breathe too hard. I grabbed a plate of fancy hors d'oeuvres that I couldn't pronounce and found a quiet corner where I could observe the social dynamics without actively participating. That's when I heard them. I was standing near the library door, hidden behind a massive floral arrangement that probably cost more than my monthly rent, when I overheard what would become the conversation that changed my life forever. "Poor Millie," Aunt Margaret was saying to my sister Jennifer, her voice dripping with the kind of false sympathy that could kill small plants. "Still unmarried at 36, and now with this fertility situation, it's just so tragic." My blood turned to ice. Fertility situation. "Well, what did she expect?" Jennifer replied, her voice sharp with the kind of cruelty she'd perfected in high school. "All those years focusing on her little paintings instead of finding a decent husband. Now her eggs are probably dried up like watercolors on a palette." I nearly choked on my champagne. Little paintings. "At least she can't pass on her peculiarities," added Cousin Bradley, and I could practically hear his smirk. Can you imagine if she'd had children, little artist babies running around, making messes and thinking feelings matter more than financial statements? Aunt Patricia's laugh was like glass breaking. Robert always said Millie was too sensitive for the real world. Remember when she cried at that board meeting because someone called her presentation cute? She's just not built for success like the rest of us. The infertility is probably a blessing in disguise, Margaret continued, warming to her theme. At least she won't be passing on those artistic delusions to another generation. Could you imagine trying to explain to the country club that your grandchild was what does she call herself, a watercolor abstractionist? I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. First of all, I wasn't infertile, I'd simply chosen not to have children because I'd spent most of my 30s too broke to afford proper health care, let alone babies. Second, I'd never had fertility testing because I'd never tried to get pregnant. But apparently, my family had decided that my single status and childless state meant I was defective. She's always been the weak link, Bradley added. Remember when she won that art contest in high school, Dad was so embarrassed he wouldn't even hang the certificate in his office. Well, what's done is done, Jennifer said with finality. At least Dad doesn't have to watch her fail anymore. Can you imagine if she'd tried to make a career out of art? We'd probably be supporting her for the rest of her life. I stood there, frozen behind the flowers, feeling like my entire world was crumbling around me. These people, my family, were talking about me like I was a problem to be solved, a genetic dead end, a cautionary tale about what happens when you follow your dreams instead of family expectations. But before I could spiral completely into self-pity, something unexpected happened. Ms. Clark, a voice behind me made me jump, nearly knocking over the floral arrangement. I turned to find a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, wearing a conservative gray suit and carrying a leather briefcase that screamed expensive legal services. "I'm Harold Pemberton, your father's attorney," he said, extending his hand. "I've been looking for you. There are some items your father specifically requested that I give to you personally." "Items?" I asked, still reeling from the conversation I'd just overheard. "Yes, he was quite specific about the timing. He wanted you to receive these after the service, but before the reading of the will." Mr. Pemberton glanced around the crowded room. "Perhaps we could step into your father's study for privacy." I followed him through the familiar hallways of my childhood home, past family portraits that had never included any of my artwork, toward Dad's private study. The room smelled like leather and disappointment, exactly as I remembered. Mr. Pemberton set his briefcase on Dad's massive oak desk and opened it with the precision of someone who'd done this many times before. From inside, he pulled out a wooden box about the size of a laptop, carved with intricate details that looked suspiciously like, "Were those paintbrushes? Your father left specific instructions about this," he said, handing me the box. "He wanted you to open it alone. And he wanted you to know that everything inside represents thoughts he struggled to express during his lifetime." The box was heavier than I'd expected, and when I lifted the lid, I gasped. Inside were 3 items, a thick letter with my name written in Dad's careful handwriting, a leather-bound photo album, and a small flash drive. "Take your time," Mr. Pemberton said gently. "I'll wait outside." With trembling hands, I opened the letter first. "My dearest Millie, if you're reading this, it means I've run out of time to say the things I should have said while I was alive. I've never been good with words, you know that better than anyone, but I need you to understand some things that I couldn't figure out how to express when it mattered. First, I need you to know that I have never, not for one single day, been disappointed in you. I know I never said that. And I know my silence felt like disapproval, but the truth is much more complicated and much more embarrassing for a stubborn old man like me. I was terrified of your talent. There, I said it. Your mother, God rest her soul, used to laugh at me because I'd sneak into your room after you'd gone to sleep just to look at your latest painting. even when you were 8 years old, drawing those wild, colorful pictures that covered every surface of your bedroom. I could see something in your work that took my breath away. It was like you could see the world in ways that the rest of us couldn't even imagine. But I didn't know how to support something I didn't understand. I'd spent my entire life in the world of business, where success was measured in dollars and market share. How could I guide you in a world where success was measured in what beauty, emotion, truth? I was lost. So I stayed silent, thinking that silence was better than saying the wrong thing. I convinced myself that if I didn't actively discourage you, that was support enough. I was wrong. And I'm sorry. The photo album will show you what I couldn't say. The flash drive contains something that I hope will prove how wrong you are if you think I wasn't proud of you. Millie, you have a gift that none of the rest of us possess. You see the world and translate it into something beautiful, something that makes people feel less alone. That's not a talent that can be measured in quarterly earnings or stock portfolios. It's something much more rare and much more valuable. I know the family doesn't understand you, and I know they probably never will. But I need you to know that you don't need their understanding to be extraordinary. You already are. The business will be divided among your siblings as expected. They understand that world and will grow it properly. But I've left you something different, something that I hope will give you the freedom to create without worry about practical concerns. Stop letting other people's limitations define your possibilities. With all my love and respect, your very proud father, P.S. Your Aunt Margaret once asked me why I didn't have any family photos in my office. What she didn't know is that I have 3 of your paintings hanging behind my desk where only I can see them. They're the most beautiful things in that stuffy room, and they remind me every day that my youngest daughter sees magic where the rest of us see only business. By the time I finished reading, I was crying so hard that I could barely see the pages. My father, my distant, emotionally unavailable father, had been proud of me all along. He'd just been too scared and stubborn to figure out how to say it. With shaking hands, I opened the photo album. The first page nearly knocked me over. There was a photo of me at age 6, covered in finger paint, grinning like I'd just discovered electricity. But what made me gasp was the note in Dad's handwriting underneath, Millie's first masterpiece. She painted the kitchen table and called it Rainbow Dreams. Took 3 hours to clean up, but it was worth every minute. I flipped through page after page of photos I'd never seen before. Me at school art shows, Dad in the background of every single one, beaming with pride. Me winning that high school art contest Bradley had mentioned, but here was a photo of Dad framing the certificate, and another of it hanging in his bedroom. Not his office. There were photos of him at my college art exhibitions, standing in corners where I'd never noticed him, watching me explain my work to other people. There was even a photo of him in my studio apartment, looking around with wonder rather than disappointment. How had I never seen him there? How had I missed all of this? The flash drive was the final revelation. I plugged it into Dad's computer, and what I found there made me laugh and cry at the same time. Folder after folder of photos of my artwork, meticulously organized by year and medium. Professional photographs he'd hired photographers to document my paintings. There were folders labeled Millie's Blue Period, Millie's Abstract Phase, and Millie's Latest Masterpieces. But the folder that made me completely lose it was labeled Millie's Future Gallery. Inside were architectural plans, contractor estimates, and legal documents for a property downtown. Dad had been planning to surprise me with my own gallery space. There was a note attached to the architectural plans, for when she's ready to show the world what I've always known, that she's extraordinary. I sat in Dad's leather chair, surrounded by evidence of a love I'd never known existed, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. All these years, I'd been carrying the weight of his disappointment, living small to match what I thought were his expectations of me. But I'd been wrong about everything, and suddenly, I was furious. I've always been what people call conflict avoidant. I'm the person who apologizes when someone else bumps into me, who laughs at jokes that aren't funny to avoid awkward silence, who pretends not to hear when people say hurtful things rather than confronting them directly. But sitting in Dad's study, holding evidence of his secret pride in my work, while the echoes of my family's cruel words still rang in my ears, I felt something I'd never experienced before: righteous anger. These people, these petty, small-minded, judgmental people had been talking about me like I was defective while I'd been too polite to defend myself. They'd been making assumptions about my life, my choices, and my worth, while contributing absolutely nothing positive to the world themselves. Well, that was about to change. I carefully packed the letter, photo album, and flash drive back into the wooden box. Then I walked to Dad's bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. I looked like someone who'd been crying, which was accurate. But I also looked like someone who'd just discovered she had nothing left to lose, which was even more accurate. I splashed cold water on my face, straightened my vintage suit jacket, and walked back out to the reception with the wooden box tucked under my arm and a completely new understanding of who I was and what I deserved. The conversation was still happening near the floral arrangement, but it had expanded to include more family members. Perfect. I approached the group with the kind of calm confidence that only comes from having nuclear weapons in your back pocket. They were so absorbed in their character assassination that they didn't notice me until I was standing directly in front of them. "Oh, Millie," Aunt Margaret exclaimed, her face immediately rearranging itself into an expression of fake sympathy. "There you are, dear. We were just discussing my fertility situation," I interrupted, setting the wooden box on the nearby coffee table with a satisfying thunk, "and my dried-up eggs, and how Dad was embarrassed by my artistic delusions." The silence that followed was the kind of silence that makes you aware of every clock ticking in the room. Jennifer's face went pale. Bradley suddenly found his shoes very interesting. Aunt Patricia looked like someone had just told her the country club was being converted into a homeless shelter. "Now, Millie," Uncle Richard started, employing the condescending tone he usually reserved for explaining stock portfolios to his wife. "You shouldn't eavesdrop on private conversations." "Private conversations." I laughed, and it came out sharper than I'd intended. "Uncle Richard, you were standing 15 feet from me in a room full of people. If you wanted privacy, you should have rented a conference room." "We didn't mean anything by it," Jennifer said quickly, her voice taking on the wheedling tone she'd used as a child when she'd been caught stealing my Halloween candy. "We were just concerned about you. Concerned about me." I opened the wooden box and pulled out Dad's letter. Let me tell you what concern actually looks like. I began reading selected passages from Dad's letter, watching their faces change with every word. When I got to the part about him being proud of my talent, Bradley actually snorted. "Oh, come on, Millie. Dad never cared about your little hobby. He was just being nice because he was dying." That's when I pulled out the photo album. "Is that what you call this?" I opened to a page showing Dad at one of my college exhibitions, his face glowing with pride. A dying man's politeness. I flipped through the pages, showing them photo after photo of Dad supporting my art in ways I'd never even known about. With each image, their expressions grew more uncomfortable. "And this," I said, pulling out printouts from the flash drive, "is what Dad called Millie's future gallery." I spread the architectural plans across the coffee table. He was planning to give me my own gallery space. These are professional photographs he commissioned of my work, organized by artistic period. Aunt Margaret's mouth was hanging open like a broken gate. Jennifer looked like she was trying to solve calculus in her head. Uncle Richard kept blinking like someone had pointed a flashlight at his face. "But that's impossible," Patricia finally managed. "Robert never mentioned any of this. He never supported her art." "He never supported it publicly," I corrected, "because he was a private man who didn't know how to express emotion. But he supported it financially, professionally, and personally in ways that none of you bothered to notice because you were too busy judging me." "Bradley," who apparently hadn't learned when to quit, decided to double down. Even if that's true, it doesn't change the fact that you're 36, unmarried, and childless. Dad might have humored your art, but he still knew you weren't living up to your potential. I held up my hand to stop him, and for some reason, he actually shut up. Bradley, since we're discussing personal failures, let's talk about yours. I turned to face him fully, and I saw something flicker in his eyes that looked suspiciously like fear. Should I mention the gambling addiction that cost you your house last year, or the fact that you've been embezzling money from your own company to pay your bookies? The color drained from Bradley's face so quickly, I was genuinely concerned he might faint. How did you? He started. I might be the family artist, but I'm not stupid. Bradley, I have eyes, and I pay attention. Did you think nobody would notice that your lifestyle doesn't match your declared income? Or that you've been selling family heirlooms on eBay to cover your debts? I turned to Jennifer next. And speaking of family secrets, Jennifer, how's your marriage to Dr. Perfect? Still pretending you don't know about his affair with his receptionist? Or have you moved on to pretending you don't care because the prenup would leave you with nothing? Jennifer's face went through several colors before settling on a shade of green that reminded me of seasickness. That's not, she stammered. It's not what true. I saw the photos on his phone at Christmas dinner when he left it on the counter. Apparently, his definition of consultation is very different from Webster's. Uncle Richard tried to step in. Now, see here. Millie, this is inappropriate. What's inappropriate? Uncle Richard? The fact that I know you've been having an emotional affair with your secretary for the past 3 years? Or the fact that you think none of us have noticed that your business trips always coincide with her vacation days? His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. I was just getting warmed up. Aunt Margaret, should we discuss your shoplifting habit, or Aunt Patricia, would you prefer I mention your prescription drug problem that you think nobody knows about? The group was starting to look like a collection of deer caught in headlights, but I wasn't done. Years of swallowed insults and unspoken hurt were pouring out of me like water through a broken dam. The difference between you and me, I continued, my voice rising with passion, is that I have never, not once, judged any of you for your personal struggles. I've never made cruel comments about your marriages, your addictions, your poor choices, or your failures. I've never talked behind your backs or made assumptions about your worth as human beings. I gestured around the circle of stunned faces. But you have spent years treating me like a cautionary tale, like evidence of what happens when someone doesn't conform to your narrow definition of success. You've mocked my art, dismissed my choices, and apparently decided among yourselves that I'm some kind of genetic defect that shouldn't reproduce. Margaret tried to interrupt, but I was on a roll. Well, here's a news flash. I chose not to have children, not because I can't, but because I've spent my adult life building something beautiful instead of something expected. I chose art over marriage because I'd rather create meaning than conform to tradition. And I chose authenticity over approval because I'd rather be genuine than popular. I picked up Dad's letter and held it up like evidence in a trial. And it turns out, the one person whose approval I thought I'd never have was actually proud of me all along. The only person in this family who never made me feel small or defective was quietly supporting my dreams while the rest of you were busy tearing them down. The silence that followed was different from the earlier one. This wasn't uncomfortable surprise. This was the silence of people who'd been caught red-handed and knew it. Jennifer was the first to try damage control. Millie, we never meant to hurt you. We were just what? Just being honest, just looking out for me, just expressing concern. I laughed again, and this time it was genuinely amused rather than bitter. No, Jennifer, you were just being cruel because cruelty is easier than compassion, and judgment is easier than understanding. I closed the wooden box and tucked it back under my arm. But here's what's going to happen now. Dad left me more than just emotional validation, he left me financial independence and a business plan. I'm going to open that gallery he planned, and I'm going to make it everything he dreamed it could be. I paused for dramatic effect. Because honestly, after 36 years of being the family punching bag, I felt I'd earned a moment of drama. And when it's successful, not if. When none of you get to claim credit, none of you get to say you always believed in me. None of you get to rewrite history to make yourselves look supportive. Bradley, who apparently had a death wish, tried one more time. Millie, you're being dramatic. We're family. Family, I interrupted. Supports each other. Family builds each other up instead of tearing each other down. Family celebrates each other's successes instead of mocking their dreams. I looked around the circle one more time, meeting each of their eyes directly. You want to know what's really tragic? It's not that I'm 36 and unmarried. It's not that I chose art over conventional success. It's that you're all so small-minded and insecure that you need to tear down someone else's happiness to feel better about your own failures. 3 months later, I stood in front of what would soon be the Robert Clark Memorial Gallery, holding a set of keys and feeling like I was about to burst with excitement. The space was everything Dad had envisioned, and more high ceilings, natural light, and enough wall space to display dozens of pieces. The morning of the grand opening. I woke up in my new apartment above the gallery because Dad's plans had included living space. Because apparently he'd thought of everything and felt something I'd never experienced before, complete confidence in my own worth. I'd spent the past 3 months not just preparing the gallery, but transforming myself. I'd hired a therapist who specialized in family trauma, because even though I was now financially secure, I wasn't about to let 36 years of emotional damage go untreated. I joined a local artists collective and discovered an entire community of creative people who understood my passion. And I'd started dating someone, a fellow artist named Marcus, who thought my watercolors were gorgeous and my family stories were hilarious rather than tragic. The gallery opening was everything I'd dreamed it could be. Local art critics came, fellow artists brought friends, and even some of my former colleagues from the part-time jobs I'd worked to pay rent showed up to support me. And yes, my family came too. They arrived fashionably late, dressed in their most expensive clothes, looking around the gallery with expressions that ranged from grudging admiration to barely concealed shock. My watercolors covered the walls bold, vibrant pieces that transformed the space into something magical. Millie. Aunt Margaret approached me with the kind of smile usually reserved for hostage situations. This is quite impressive. Thank you, I replied politely, because I'd learned that being gracious didn't mean being weak. We always knew you had talent, Uncle Richard added, apparently having completely forgotten the conversation from 3 months earlier. That's when I smiled my sweetest smile and delivered the line I'd been practicing in the mirror for weeks. How interesting that you say that, Uncle Richard. Because I have recordings of several family conversations that suggest otherwise. In fact, I've been documenting family interactions for my next art project. It's a multimedia installation about the psychology of family dynamics. You'd be surprised how therapeutic it is to turn emotional abuse into abstract expressionism. His face went through several interesting color changes. Jennifer tried a different approach. We're so proud of you, Millie. We always believed you'd find success eventually. Jennifer, I said gently, I appreciate the sentiment, but we both know that's not true, and honestly, that's okay. You don't get to rewrite history just because the ending turned out better than you expected. I gestured around the gallery, which was packed with people admiring my work, buying my paintings, and celebrating my success. This is what believing in someone looks like. These people, my real community, supported my art when it was hanging in a drafty studio apartment and selling for grocery money. They encouraged me when I doubted myself, and they celebrated with me when things went well. I paused, watching a young woman about my age explaining one of my paintings to her boyfriend with genuine enthusiasm. You want to be proud of me now? That's fine, but you don't get to be part of this success story because you weren't part of the struggle that created it. Bradley, apparently having learned nothing from our previous encounter, decided to try again. Come on, Millie, we're family. You can't just cut us out because of a few misunderstandings. Misunderstandings! I laughed, and several people turned to look at us. Bradley, you called my life's work little paintings and suggested my hypothetical children would be genetic mistakes. That's not a misunderstanding, that's cruelty. I looked around at my family. These people who shared my DNA, but had never shared my dreams. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice clear and confident. You're welcome to visit the gallery during regular business hours like any other members of the public. You're welcome to admire the art and even purchase pieces if you'd like. But you don't get to claim any credit for this success. And you don't get to use my name or achievements to make yourselves look good. What do you mean? Patricia asked nervously. I mean that when people ask about your niece's art gallery, you don't get to say you always supported my dreams. When colleagues mention seeing my work in magazines, you don't get to claim you knew I'd be successful. When I win awards or get featured in exhibitions, you don't get to bask in reflected glory. I smiled at them with genuine warmth because I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. You had your chance to be part of this story, and you chose to be the antagonists instead of the supporters. That was your choice. And this is mine. 6 months after the gallery opening, I was featured on the cover of Denver Art Monthly with the headline, From Family Disappointment to Gallery Success, the Millie Clark Story. The article included quotes from Dad's letter with my permission and photos of the gallery space he'd planned. It also included this quote from me. The most important thing I've learned is that other people's limitations don't have to become your boundaries. Sometimes the people who love you most are the least equipped to understand your dreams, and that's okay. Your job isn't to make them understand, it's to pursue your dreams anyway. The article went viral on social media, shared by artists and dreamers who related to the story of family disapproval and ultimate triumph. I received hundreds of messages from people who felt inspired to pursue their own creative dreams, despite family pressure to choose more practical paths. But my favorite response came from a 17-year-old girl named Sarah, who wrote, "Thank you for showing me that I don't have to be what my parents want me to be. I'm applying to art school instead of business school, and I'm going to paint my dreams instead of living theirs." That's when I knew Dad would have been proud, not just of my success, but of the way I was using it to help other people find their own courage. The week the article came out, Aunt Margaret called me. "Millie, dear, I saw the magazine article. It was very well written." "Thank you," I said, genuinely meaning it. "I was wondering if you might mention in future interviews that you come from a supportive family, for balance." I was quiet for a moment, looking around my gallery office at the photos Dad had secretly taken of my work, the architectural plans he'd drawn up for my future, and the letter that had changed everything. "Aunt Margaret," I said finally, "I do come from a supportive family. It just turned out to be smaller than I originally thought." Today, 2 years after Dad's funeral, I wake up every morning in my apartment above the gallery that bears his name. The Robert Clark Memorial Gallery has become one of Denver's most respected contemporary art spaces, featuring not just my work, but pieces by dozens of local artists who needed a place to show their dreams. I've sold over 200 paintings, been featured in 3 national magazines, and recently accepted a commission to create a mural for the city's new cultural center. More importantly, I've helped launch the careers of 15 other artists who were told their work wasn't practical or marketable. My family still sends Christmas cards and birthday wishes, and I respond politely but distantly. They occasionally visit the gallery, always careful to act impressed and supportive while avoiding any acknowledgement of their previous behavior. It's like watching people perform a play about being good relatives. But I've learned something important: forgiveness doesn't require forgetting, and moving forward doesn't mean pretending the past didn't happen. They damaged my self-confidence for years, but they didn't destroy my talent. They questioned my choices, But they couldn't stop me from making them. They tried to make me smaller, but they just made me stronger. Marcus and I got married last spring in a ceremony at the gallery, surrounded by paintings and friends who celebrate each other's successes instead of mocking each other's dreams. We're talking about having kids someday, not because it's expected, but because we want to raise children who know they're valued for who they are, not who other people think they should be. And yes, Aunt Margaret asked if she could take credit for always supporting my artistic journey in her holiday newsletter. I told her she was welcome to write whatever she wanted, but that I'd be happy to provide fact-checking services if needed. She decided to focus on her garden instead. The best part of my new life isn't the financial security, or the critical acclaim, or even the satisfaction of proving my family wrong. It's the knowledge that I spent years thinking I needed their approval to be valuable, when what I actually needed was my own permission to be extraordinary. Dad's letter taught me that love doesn't always look like support, and support doesn't always look like understanding. Sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is proof that they believed in you all along, even when they couldn't figure out how to show it. But the greatest gift you can give yourself is believing in your own worth, regardless of whether anyone else understands it. My name is Millie Clark. I'm 38 years old, and I'm living proof that the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting happy. And if happiness happens to include a successful art gallery, financial independence, and the deeply satisfying knowledge that you proved your critics wrong, well, that's just the brushstroke on top of the masterpiece.